My ex took my life savings while I paid for her dream vacations, so I ghosted completely. And what happened next left her in ruins. I'm a 28-year-old guy. I thought I'd finally found someone I could trust completely. My life had been steady for a while. I worked long hours as a software engineer, saving methodically, finally feeling like all my effort was paying off. I wasn't rich, but I was comfortable, independent, and proud of how far I'd come on my own. I liked things planned and predictable, which made Sophie's spontaneous charm all the more intoxicating. From the moment we met, she had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room. Sophie was everything I'd secretly been hoping for in a partner. Funny, warm, attentive, and just a little mischievous. She had this smile that made it impossible to question anything she said. And she listened in a way that made you feel heard, really heard, for the first time. We'd spend entire weekends walking through the city, stopping at cafes, talking about our childhoods, our dreams, and everything in between. Our conversations were endless, sometimes drifting into serious territory about marriage, traveling the world, and someday owning a home together. It felt like we were building a life in our heads even before we had one in reality, I'll admit. I was proud of being able to support her in small ways, splitting meals, covering tickets to concerts she adored, even helping her with little bills when she was short one month. I kept telling myself it was temporary, that I was just helping someone I loved while she got her own life sorted. In hindsight, that pride might have blinded me. Sophie would sometimes mention her expensive hobbyist painting classes, weekend getaways, boutique shopping, and laugh about her bucket list vacation she dreamed of taking to Europe. I'd nod along, casually asking questions, unaware that her dreams were quietly testing the limits of my trust. There was a subtle unease I couldn't quite put my finger on, like a shadow behind her eyes, whenever she talked about money. But I shrugged it off. She was just stressed, I told myself. Everyone had their burdens. I thought I was being a supportive boyfriend, the kind who loved unconditionally. I had no idea this was the beginning of a slow unraveling, a road that would leave my trust shattered. And then one evening, when she casually dropped a line about booking the trip of a lifetime, something in my gut told me things were about to get complicated. I'm a 28-year-old guy, and by the time Sophie started talking seriously about this trip, I was already knee-deep in helping her with everyday expenses. It started small, covering her share of a dinner here, grabbing tickets to a concert she'd been dying to see there, but over time, it grew into something more significant. I was working late nights, grinding extra hours on weekends, all while quietly proud that I could support someone I cared about. In my mind, it wasn't just money, it was love. I believed in us, in our future, and in the idea that helping her now would strengthen the bond we were building. Sophie, of course, played her part perfectly. She'd curl up next to me on the couch, resting her head on my shoulder, and thank me with a warmth that made it impossible to say no. "You're the only one who really understands me," she'd whisper, and I would melt. There were moments when I'd glance at her texting late at night or notice her smiling at messages I wasn't included in. But I rationalized it. She had friends, a life outside mine. And honestly, her occasional evasiveness seemed harmless compared to the honesty and affection she showed me every day. Then came the vacation planning. Sophie started dropping hints about this elaborate European trip she'd been dreaming about for years. Gondola rides in Venice, exploring Parisian art galleries, staying in boutique hotels that were way beyond my comfort zone. "It's just a dream, but maybe someday," she'd say with a gleam in her eyes. I remember feeling a pang of nervousness in my stomach, but I brushed it off and said, "We'll figure it out. I want to make it happen with you." I didn't realize that my eagerness to help, my pride in being supportive, was quietly feeding something bigger. Evenings blurred together. I'd return from work exhausted, yet I found myself excited to plan the next part of the trip, with her checking flights, comparing accommodations, mapping out sightseeing routes. Sophie was always cheerful, often teasing me when I overplanned. But there was a subtle tension behind her laughter. Something in the way she casually mentioned needing just a little help with costs. I chalked it up to her being thoughtful and careful with her finances. Looking back, those moments were the calm before the storm. I thought I was being the perfect boyfriend. unaware that my trust and patience were quietly being tested in ways I couldn't yet see. And as the trip dates drew closer, I started noticing tiny inconsistencies in her stories flights, booked without telling me. Mysterious extra charges, though I still convinced myself it was nothing. Something was off, but I didn't want to see it. Not yet. I'm a 28-year-old guy, and by the time Sophie officially booked the trip, I was fully invested emotionally and financially. It was a lavish European getaway, everything she had ever dreamed of: gondola rides in Venice, nights in boutique hotels, fine dining, museum tours. I remember staring at the confirmation emails, feeling a mix of excitement and anxiety. My credit card had taken a hit I hadn't anticipated, but I told myself it was worth it seeing her happy, experiencing this dream together. It all felt like a milestone in our relationship. Sophie, of course, radiated joy. She'd hover over my shoulder as I planned each day, playfully arguing about which museum to visit first, suggesting romantic cafes. Giggling when I overplanned every minute of the itinerary. "You're adorable when you get like this," she'd tease, and I'd laugh, feeling proud that I could make her dream a reality. There were long nights where we'd sit on the balcony of our rented apartment, sipping wine, watching the city lights flicker, and she'd rest her head on my chest, murmuring about how lucky she felt to have me. I felt the same. I believed in us completely, but subtle cracks were starting to appear. Sophie would occasionally disappear for hours with her phone, claiming she was researching places or confirming bookings. I'd see her texting quickly when I entered the room, her smile a little too forced, the way she'd avoid eye contact just for a second. I convinced myself it was normal. Everyone has private moments. But a small voice in my gut started whispering doubts. Then there were the unexpected expenses. Small charges here and there, boutique purchases she had to have, spontaneous upgrades to our hotels, last-minute reservations at pricey restaurants. Each time, she would casually say, "Don't worry about it, we can figure it out," flashing that innocent smile that melted any frustration. I rationalized, "It's just a few extra costs. It's for her happiness." I didn't realize that, by letting it slide, I was quietly giving her permission to push boundaries further than I ever imagined. Even in the midst of all this, there were fleeting moments of unease. The way she laughed a little too quickly at her phone, the way she'd redirect conversations when I asked about costs, the subtle defensiveness whenever I tried to suggest a budget. I ignored them because I wanted to trust her. Deep down, I felt the tension rising, but I clung to the excitement of the trip. The romance, the shared dreams, blind to the storm, quietly brewing behind her perfect smile. And then, one afternoon, while she was out supposedly booking a wine tour, I noticed a series of strange charges on my account. I'm a 28-year-old guy, and that afternoon hit me like a punch I didn't see coming. I was checking my banking app, casually scrolling through recent transactions, when I froze. There it was, multiple charges I hadn't authorized, some in currencies I didn't even recognize. Boutique shopping sprees, expensive dinners, even upgraded flights that I had no memory of approving. My heart started pounding, and a cold knot formed in my stomach. I stared at the screen, trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was a mistake, glitch, anything. But what I was slowly realizing, when Sophie came back from booking the wine tour, I confronted her gently at first. "Hey, can you explain these charges? Some of them don't make sense to me." She looked startled, then laughed softly, brushing it off. "Oh, that. It's nothing. Just some adjustments for the trip. Don't worry. It'll be fine." But her eyes darted away from mine for just a fraction of a second, and I felt the first real sting of doubt. I pushed further. "Adjustments. Some of these are thousands. I don't remember approving them." Her smile faltered for a second, and she muttered something about needing special arrangements for certain bookings. It wasn't just the money, it was the betrayal. I felt used, manipulated, and painfully naive. Every late-night text I had ignored, every small untruth I had brushed off, suddenly took on a new, ominous meaning. I could feel my trust cracking like thin ice underfoot, and the warm, loving relationship I thought we had was slipping away fast. My chest tightened, a mix of anger, disappointment, and disbelief washing over me. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe it's a misunderstanding. Maybe she just didn't realize the charges were so high. But deep down, I knew something was very wrong. The excitement and romance of the trip had morphed into a sinister undertone I couldn't ignore. Sophie seemed almost too calm, too practiced, as if she had expected this confrontation. I didn't yell. I didn't storm out. I just sat there, frozen, staring at the numbers, feeling a profound sense of betrayal. And in that moment, I realized that the person I thought I loved had been taking advantage of my trust all along. The trip, the dreams, the laughter, it all suddenly felt like a carefully constructed trap. I wanted to confront her harder, to demand the truth. But something inside me held back, a quiet, simmering resolve forming in the pit of my stomach. I'm a 28-year-old guy, and by the time I made the decision to step back completely, my emotions were a mess of anger, disbelief, and exhaustion. I realized I couldn't reason with Sophie anymore. Every explanation felt rehearsed. Every apology the trust I had placed in her had been twisted into an opportunity for her to exploit me. I finally understood that confrontation alone wouldn't fix it. So I did the one thing I never thought I would. I went completely silent. No calls, no messages, no explanations, just a ghosting that was deliberate, calculated, and necessary. The first few days were surreal. I walked past the usual restaurants we'd visit, little cafes we'd laugh in, and felt a pang of nostalgia mixed with a bitter sense of betrayal. My phone stayed off when I wasn't at work. Every time it buzzed, my chest tightened with anxiety, wondering if it was Sophie, wondering if she'd finally realized I'd pulled away. But I told myself that this silence was power, a way to reclaim some control over a situation that had spun entirely out of my hands. Of course, messages flooded in. Please, we need to talk. I don't understand. Why are you ignoring me? Even mutual friends began asking if everything was okay if we'd had an argument. I didn't respond. The anxiety she projected was almost palpable, and yet I kept my distance. Watching as the weight of her desperation grew, every day felt like a careful balancing act. I was torn between guilt and satisfaction, the guilt for letting a relationship crumble without confrontation, and satisfaction for finally protecting myself from further manipulation. Nights were the hardest. The apartment felt hollow, every shadow a reminder of how completely my trust had been betrayed. I replayed every conversation, every laugh, every shared plan, and slowly realized how much of it had been performed, not felt by the end of that first week of silence. I could already see cracks appearing in her composure. She began reaching out through friends, asking questions, subtly trying to gauge my reactions. I felt a dark satisfaction at the unraveling, a quiet thrill at witnessing her confusion and desperation. But I knew this was just the beginning. The storm I had unleashed would take its course, and I had no idea just how far things would spiral before the balance of power finally shifted. I'm a 28-year-old guy, and watching Sophie start to unravel from a distance was unsettling, even though I knew it was inevitable. The first cracks appeared socially. Friends who had once admired her for her charm and spontaneity started noticing the shift, how anxious she was, how defensive she became in casual conversations. One mutual friend casually mentioned, "She's been so tense lately, like she's hiding something." I didn't reply, of course, but a part of me felt satisfaction. For the first time, I saw that her world was beginning to reflect the chaos she had created in mine. Financially, the spiral was equally obvious. I started hearing snippets from friends and acquaintances about her struggling to keep up with her usual lifestyle. The extravagant dinners, the boutique shopping, the weekend splurges suddenly, all of it became a burden she couldn't manage alone. And the most ironic part? She had no one to blame but herself. Every extravagant charge I had covered before, every little help I had given, had been manipulated into a pattern she couldn't sustain without me. Meanwhile, I had to confront my own feelings. There was a strange mix of vindication and guilt, watching someone I had once loved struggle because of their own choices. I knew I couldn't intervene without undoing the lesson she was about to learn. Still, nights were heavy walking past the cafes we had frequented together. Smelling the lingering aroma of pastries and coffee reminded me that this wasn't just a game. Someone I had trusted completely had betrayed me, and that betrayal had consequences I had no choice but to witness. Sophie began trying to reach me through friends, subtly asking if she could make things right, but her attempts were weak and transparent. I could see the desperation in her eyes when we crossed paths at social gatherings. It was no longer the carefree, charming woman I had adored. The tables had turned, and now she was navigating a world where trust had been broken. Her safety net ripped away, and yet, despite the chaos, there was still something simmering in the background, a fear I couldn't quite shake. Sophie wasn't done. I could sense that she was planning, calculating, trying to figure out how to regain what she had lost. The tension lingered in every glance, every whispered conversation behind my back. The story wasn't over, and I knew the next twist would hit harder than anything that had come before. I'm a 28-year-old guy. Just when I thought the situation had settled into a slow unraveling for Sophie, the unexpected happened. She started trying to manipulate others to regain access not just to me, but to my friends, acquaintances, even colleagues I'd shared networking contacts with. At first, it was subtle, innocent-sounding questions. Casual conversations aimed at gauging my whereabouts, even planting doubts about me being unreasonable. I noticed the way her tone shifted when she thought I wasn't paying attention, the almost imperceptible tension in her voice when she asked a mutual friend about me. One evening, a close friend pulled me aside and whispered, "She's been talking. About the charges, about the trip, about you." I don't think she realizes people are noticing. My stomach sank, not because I was worried, but because I realized just how far she was willing to go to cover her tracks. I felt a mixture of unease and satisfaction. The same woman who had manipulated me for months was now floundering in a world she had thought she could control. Sophie's attempts to regain influence were clumsy, almost desperate. She would casually mention my name in conversations, drop hints about my generosity, or imply that I had overreacted. Friends who had once liked her began exchanging knowing looks, and the admiration she once commanded started to erode. I couldn't help but feel a pang of ironic justice. Her carefully constructed persona of charm and innocence was cracking, revealing the manipulation underneath. Yet even as her reputation faltered, I felt a creeping tension. Watching someone unravel, even someone who had betrayed you, is unnerving. There's a strange thrill, yes, but also a reminder of how vulnerable trust makes you and how easily it can be broken. I found myself replaying every smile, every affectionate word, every whispered "I love you," and realizing how skillfully she had used them to her advantage. And then came the subtle, chilling realization: Sophie wasn't done. I could see her calculating her next moves, testing boundaries, probing for weaknesses. The calm I had felt was only temporary, quiet before the storm that was about to hit harder than anything I had experienced so far. I'm a 28-year-old guy, and by the time I hit my rock-bottom reflection, the situation had become almost unbearable to watch from a distance. Sophie's life was visibly crumbling. Her carefully curated charm and confidence had faded into desperation. At gatherings, I could see her forcing smiles, laughing too loudly, nervously glancing around as if expecting judgment. Friends whispered, subtle glances exchanged, hinting at secrets I already knew. Every time I caught a glimpse of that tension in her eyes, a mixture of guilt and grim satisfaction welled up inside me. I couldn't escape my own thoughts either. Nights were the hardest lying awake in my apartment, the city lights flickering through the blinds, and the echo of her laughter from happier days haunting me. I kept replaying our conversations, the planning of the trip, her playful teasing, how effortlessly she had manipulated me. Anger mixed with regret. I had allowed myself to be deceived, to be used, to be blind in the name of love. The realization hit harder than any confrontation could. Sophie's financial spiral intensified. Reports reached me, friends mentioning her panic over unpaid bills, canceled plans, and last-minute cutbacks. The luxurious lifestyle she had flaunted and relied upon was slipping through her fingers. Her attempts to explain herself were weak, often met with eye rolls or barely concealed disbelief from others. And yet, I felt a twinge of unease, a reminder that she was unpredictable. Her desperation could still escalate into something messier. I wrestled with conflicting emotions. Part of me wanted to intervene, to confront her and close the chapter definitively. Another part, the one that had endured betrayal, insisted on stepping back, letting consequences unfold naturally. The apartment felt heavy, silent, except for the distant hum of traffic. And I realized that watching someone unravel, even someone who had hurt you, was its own kind of torment by the end of those long, reflective nights. I understood something crucial. Sophie's downfall wasn't complete, and neither was my sense of closure. The simmering tension in the air hinted at an inevitable, more dramatic confrontation. I could feel it, a twist lurking just beyond the horizon, one that would finally tip the scales and reveal the full extent of the consequences she would face. I'm a 28-year-old guy, and by the time I decided to take strategic action, I knew I had to be methodical. I couldn't risk emotional impulses undoing the lessons Sophie needed to learn, or leaving me vulnerable again. Quietly, I began securing my finances, changing passwords, alerting banks to suspicious activity, and keeping detailed records of every transaction she had manipulated. It wasn't about revenge in a dramatic, flashy sense. It was about ensuring she could never exploit me again, and that justice, in a practical sense, was served. From a distance, I watched Sophie flounder even more. Her attempts to regain access or influence over my social circles became obvious and clumsy. Mutual friends were confused by her narratives, noticing contradictions in her stories. "I think she's making things up," one friend said casually, almost in passing. It stung not because I cared about her reputation, but because I realized just how completely she had lost control over the world she had once manipulated with ease. The satisfaction was quiet, almost imperceptible. I didn't gloat or call attention to her failures. Instead, I let the consequences unfold naturally, observing from the sidelines. Nights that once felt heavy and tense now carried a strange sense of empowerment. I knew my boundaries were restored, and my life was slowly returning to a space where trust could exist against carefully, cautiously but authentically. Even so, there was an underlying tension. Sophie was still scheming, still trying subtle ways to regain a foothold, and I could sense her frustration boiling over. It was a reminder of how manipulation can linger, how betrayal can cast long shadows even after you step away. I made mental notes, carefully planning how to shield myself from any further attempts at intrusion or deceit. By the end of this phase, the balance of power had clearly shifted. Sophie was exposed, vulnerable, and scrambling, while I had reclaimed control not with confrontation, but with patience, foresight, and quiet decisiveness. And yet I knew the climax wasn't over. There was one final confrontation or revelation on the horizon, one that would deliver the ultimate closure and set the stage for complete resolution. I'm a 28-year-old guy. In the moment of confrontation, or at least the emotional closers finally arrived, it wasn't dramatic or explosive. I didn't storm into her apartment or call her out in front of everyone. Instead, it was subtle, a meeting arranged through mutual friends under the guise of casual conversation. I could see the tension in her eyes the second I walked in, the carefully constructed confidence of the past months crumbling into uncertainty. She tried to smile, tried to joke, but it was clear she knew I had the upper hand. "I don't understand why you're ignoring me," she said quietly, almost pleading. Her voice carried that old familiarity, but it lacked the warmth I had once adored. I leaned back, calm, and simply stated, "I'm not here to argue. You've done what you needed to do to learn your own lessons. I'm done being part of it." Her mouth opened as if to reply, but no words came. I let the silence hang, letting the weight of my boundaries, my control, and my regained self-respect speak for itself. Friends who were present noticed the shift immediately. Where Sophie had once commanded attention with charm and wit, now she seemed small, uncertain, exposed. Every attempt to manipulate or charm backfired. Her previous tactics fell flat, and I felt an unexpected mix of relief and vindication. Relief that I was no longer a victim of manipulation. Vindication in seeing the woman who had once exploited me finally face the consequences of her actions. There was a strange, almost surreal calm as I left that meeting. No dramatic revenge, no shouting match, just a quiet, firm assertion of my independence and emotional power. Sophie's attempts at reconciliation were futile. She realized that the bridge she had burned was beyond repair. I walked away knowing that the scales had finally tipped, and for the first time in months I felt unburdened. And yet, as I returned to my apartment that evening, a lingering awareness stayed with me. This wasn't just about money or betrayal, it was about trust, boundaries, and the lessons we learn when someone takes advantage of our goodwill. Sophie's world had shifted irrevocably, and I could finally begin rebuilding my own life, free from the shadows of manipulation. But the echo of her desperation lingered, a reminder of how fragile trust can be, and how satisfying it is to reclaim it once lost. I'm a 28-year-old guy, and after that final encounter, my life slowly began to feel like my own again. The anxiety that had shadowed me for months started to lift, replaced by a cautious sense of empowerment. I returned to my routines, work, friends, hobbies, but everything felt sharper, clearer, like I'd been wading through fog and finally emerged into sunlight. The lessons from Sophie's betrayal stayed with me. Trust is precious. Boundaries are non-negotiable, and self-respect must always come first. Rebuilding wasn't just practical, it was emotional. I allowed myself to process the anger, the hurt, and the disappointment that had been simmering beneath the surface. Nights alone were no longer filled with replaying manipulations or second-guessing every word she had said. Instead, I started journaling again, reconnecting with passions I had neglected, and slowly creating a sense of stability and security that was entirely my own. The apartment, once heavy with tension, now felt like a sanctuary rather than a reminder of betrayal. I observed Sophie's life from a distance, noting the consequences she faced as a direct result of her own actions. Friends would occasionally mention her struggles, financial strain, social friction, the difficulty of regaining trust with those she had manipulated. There was a part of me that felt satisfied, even vindicated, seeing the tangible results of her choices. It wasn't cruelty. It was closure. Her world had shifted, just as mine had, and I was finally free to move forward without the constant weight of her deceit pressing down on me. The most important change, though, was internal. I was no longer the same person who had blindly trusted someone without question. I had grown sharper, wiser, and more attuned to the subtle signs of manipulation. My confidence returned, not in a brash or arrogant way, but as a quiet understanding of my own worth. I realized that betrayal, though painful, can be a catalyst for growth if handled with patience and foresight. And as I began envisioning a future unshackled from Sophie's shadow, a small, ironic thought lingered in my mind. She had taken a piece of me. Yes, but in the process, she had inadvertently taught me exactly how to protect myself. It was a bittersweet victory, but a victory nonetheless. And for the first time in months, I felt like I truly owned my life again. I'm a 28-year-old guy, and by the time everything finally settled, the story had reached a point I never could have imagined. Sophie's downfall was complete, though I observed it from a distance. Word had spread through our mutual circles, her manipulations, the financial missteps, and the way she had burned bridges with friends and acquaintances alike. She had lost the social standing she once relied on, and the luxurious lifestyle she had flaunted was now impossible to maintain. It wasn't dramatic spectacle. It was quiet, inevitable, and entirely of her own making. I had no desire to gloat. I didn't need to remind anyone of what had happened, nor did I need to rub her failure in her face. Instead, I watched from afar, feeling a calm sense of closure. The last pieces of my life that had been tangled in her deceit were now disentangled. My finances were secure, my friendships intact, and my trust, though more cautious, was once again mine to give, carefully and deliberately. I felt stronger, wiser, and oddly empowered by the entire ordeal. The irony of it all wasn't lost on me. Sophie had thought she could manipulate me into endless generosity and blind trust. But in the end, it was her own choices that left her in ruins. She had underestimated patience, foresight, and the quiet power of boundaries. And though part of me mourned the fact that someone I had cared for so deeply could betray me, that loss was overshadowed by the clarity and freedom I now felt. I reflected on the lessons learned. Trust must be earned. Boundaries are essential, and people's true colors often appear when tested. Betrayal, while painful, can become a catalyst for growth if you allow yourself to step back and reclaim control. I had been a victim, yes, but now I was the architect of my own recovery, the guardian of my own life. And so, as I closed this chapter completely, I walked away unburdened. Sophie's desperation, her downfall, and the chaos she had caused were behind me. I had reclaimed my life, my peace, and my sense of self. For the first time in months, I could breathe without fear, without resentment, and without the weight of someone else's deceit pressing down on me. The story was over, but I had emerged from it stronger than ever, a quiet, satisfying victory that was entirely my own.